So the time has come to attempt to combine some of the material that was gathered at the National Gallery and at the Portrait Gallery. I'm going to work with basically this image over here, which was one of these charcoal and chalk on grey paper drawings that I did. And following the theme of art lovers, what I would like to do is have the sculptures in the foreground, and then I've got a little sketch I did in Biro of some figures that I'm going to put in the background. And I'm going to work in oil paint. I'm going to make the oil sketch, but I'm going to take an approach that's a little bit like the one that I used when I was putting charcoal and chalk onto grey paper, rather like this sketch here. So I've prepared an acrylic ground. So I've just used a little bit of burnt umber and some ochre, so that I'm going to paint on a tinted ground, and I'll start very tonally. So I've made my own brown from the burnt, from the black, the ivory black, and the yellow ochre, and some cadmium red. And I'm starting with some dark shapes, but because I'm on this tinted canvas, I'm going to be wiping back effectively to something like the grey that I was using when I worked with charcoal, the grey paper. So I'm using a brush here because I want to just get in some of my main shapes, but I will probably wipe back a bit as well. And I'm going to make different variations, different tonal grades, values just by the wiping back. But my composition idea is to have these two sculptures taking up the space there, and then I want to have in the distance my art lovers. But I wonder, who are the lovers? It could be this handsome poet, and I don't forget who she was. So I'm just going to have them as quite small figures over here, not necessarily looking at these sculptures. So currently I'm combining figures and sculptures. I haven't yet tackled architecture, and I think I would like this to be a bit bigger. So I think it's useful to work on this scale and to work in this monochrome way. So this is my oil sketch. Yes, I prefer that, I think. And because I'm working on this tinted surface, once I've wiped back and established the light and dark shapes, I've still got a tinted surface that I can actually put lighter colour onto. So I'm thinking maybe all of that should be a little bit darker. Okay, so where do we go with these figures? They need a floor, and maybe a back wall, and perhaps some of those terrific archways and pillars, which are a real feature of the Portrait Gallery. So what I particularly want to bring out in this composition really is the kind of silent conversation between these two, between the two sculptures. And so as I build up colour in particular, or maybe more, yes, colour, but particularly light, I want to have more of an emphasis on this left side of the painting. So although there's going to be figures, there are figures in the background, and I want them to be credible. I don't want them to be too strong, so that I don't want them to compete with my main subject. So I will try and achieve that effect using colour and contrast. My eyeshadow. And because I don't really have any colour notes for the portrait gallery, I'm thinking that I might just use the National Gallery colours. So green floor, red walls. But in order to control that colour, manage it, I'll mix it with my brown in order to restrain it a bit. So I did get most of what I wanted from this stage just with the brush, but because I want to emulate the charcoal rubber way approach, I'm just stretching a rag over my finger here and doing a little bit of drawing, a bit of wiping away, so that these quite subtle changes in tone, not bright direct light, but just a little bit of light within those sculpture areas of the sculpture. I can achieve some of that just by wiping back with a rag. There's partly to help me see where that variation is going to be, also just to give me a feel of how it's going to work. Is that going to be attention grabbing enough? So I've made some red and green for my basic background colours of wall and floor, and I've also added a little bit of my brown mixture to these colours, because this is provisional. I want to see how these colours work with the emphasis that I'm trying to create, drawing attention to the sculptures. So I'm not putting it on too thickly, not too heavily. Sometimes it helps just to kind of hatch the colour on a little bit so that it can be modified or changed quite easily. And I'm a little bit unsure about the light down here as well. So again, it's going on not too thickly, and I don't mind it mixing a bit with the brown. And I don't know what's going to happen up here. I'm going to find that out. But it's okay with the original ground. So that's established a bit of a colour scheme, and I'm now going to work on my sculptures and really bring them out. So for the sculptures, I've just made three grades of grey. It's a warm grey, so it's black and white, but also some ochre and some cadmium red. And again, rather like what I did with the charcoal, I'm just going to start by putting in some of the darker areas, and then I'll go straight to the lighter areas with my lighter mixture, because I want to relate the contrast in these sculptures, who are going to be my main subject, I want to relate that contrast in the sculptures to the rest of the painting. A little bit of dark down there. Okay, and then the lighter one. And as I've added white to these mixtures, I've also put in some more ochre and some more cadmium red. So I'm blocking in this lighter sculpture just fairly loosely, just so I can judge the colour. That certainly stands out. I'm going to use that's the lightest and the darkest. I made a middle colour, which I'd like to use on his sort of reflected light areas. And I think I want to make something for the base as well. So, thus far, certainly this sculpture stands out well. I don't think these relate very well. And I don't know if it's to do with the red. Let's see. I'll put a base on them both first. I'm putting a base onto these sculptures. And that one there. And they have a lighter top, a bit more colour. Put that in there. So I'm advancing some of the colour around these sculptures. I think it would be worth a bit more colour on the floor as well. And then I can come back to playing with the emphasis in the sculptures. So I'm trying a little bit more red in some of these mixtures in the sculptures. I don't know if that will relate better to, I'm hoping that it will relate better to what's behind it, i.e. the red walls. So it's going to be playing around with those, the balance of colour. That is better actually, that does. I don't know how well you see that on the screen, but that does actually pick up better. It does just harmonise more with what's behind it. So that this effect that I'm trying to achieve of a kind of subtle relationship between these two figures, these two sculpted figures, with the very light one, which I've also made a slightly pinker light for. I mean, she's already pretty bright, but I'm also going to put on effectively thicker paint for her lights. Now that's really bright, and therefore I probably need to go back to this one, him, and bring him out a little bit more with a light mixture that's not quite as bright as that, not as light as that. But so that's what I would play around with those two, and then I want to just do a little bit more to these two figures. So for these particular art lovers, I'm just sticking with the same brown mixture that I made. And I'm going to keep them more or less as silhouettes. If I were to do more to them, I would do as I've described, mixing this brown, this sort of base color, with whatever, if I were to give them their own color clothing, then I would mix it in to mix some brown into it. And I'm going to give them a little bit of a shadow, but I don't want too much. And again, this is where oil paint really helps, because I can mix things in on the surface. And in order to refine them, I've obviously got to decide what's out here. And I've made a grey. I'm not quite sure whether I'm now taking away some of that light, and I don't know if I want to keep that light. I want to keep some of it. So I probably need to adjust my grey so that as I paint over that bare canvas ground, it doesn't completely disappear, although it might be good if it did. Anyway, those are some of my options. Actually, I think by getting rid of that, I think it's better for quietening the impact of these two figures. So there's more to do, and I particularly need to work on this sculpture to add a little bit more contrast, bring out some of her face so that there can be some sort of dialogue between the two of them, and maybe play down some of that light. It's a little bit too bright. So those are the things I want to adjust to draw the attention over there. I would put a little bit of light here, I think. Okay, so an oil sketch based on the Art Lover sketches from the National Gallery and the Portrait Gallery.